Good evening, good afternoon. Welcome to Floss Tube number 4 of Red Barn Samplers. My name is Ray Niles, and I'm the designer behind Red Barn Samplers, focusing primarily on antiques, textiles, and samplers being reproduced for the cross-stitch world. In today's episode, we're going to focus on a couple of different things. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the housekeeping things I've been working on, what I'm stitching, going to share with you some different types of ground cloth or different types of fabric slash materials that individuals may have used to create some of their designs, as well as share with you some tech tips. So let's get started. So first off, I want to thank R&R Woodworking KY. They have done a fantastic job of supporting not only Red Barn Samplers, but also several of the women I stitch with in a group called the Remote Stitchers. Some of you may or may not be familiar with these winders, but what you do with these is you actually are able to wind your floss around them, and then you cut, and then all of your floss strands are all the same length. And I love that because there's consistency then as you load your needle and as you begin to stitch as well. So they kindly donated a couple items for one of the retreats I was involved in, and I also want to take a moment to thank not only R&R Woodworking, but also Jeanette Douglas and then also JBW Designs. They've both been very supportive as I've kind of gotten this initiative off the ground, and I just want to take the time to acknowledge their contribution as well. So thank you to both of those individuals. And then also I want to share a big thank you to all of you. Never in my wildest dreams did I think that Jemima Fortune Cunningham would have such a draw and so much interest by other individuals, but it's been super fun to see the number of people that have downloaded that little free chart off of redbarnsamplers.com. And I can tell you that as of this morning, I have had 457 downloads of that little sampler. And if you're wanting to see one completely stitched, I'd encourage you to hop over to Instagram and take a look at one that was done by Renee Bebla. She's known as Thistle19 on Instagram, and it is absolutely beautiful. I believe she may be stitching that for her mother, but if you want to take a look at it, jump on over on her Instagram site, Thistle19, and take a look at her finished piece. It is just beautiful. Also, I do want to take a moment and pause. The stitching community in the last week to 10 days has lost two extraordinary needleworkers, two women who contributed a great deal to the community as a whole. And the first woman I want to just take time to acknowledge is Angela Hamilton. I first met Angela a little over 3 years ago, believe it or not. She was part of a group of women that I went with to the Isle of Man. And I know some of you are thinking, Isle of Man, is that really a place? That sounds like something that Ray is making up. Yes, the Isle of Man is real. It's in the Irish Sea, and it is ringed by England, Scotland, and Ireland. And Angela and her sister were part of that group, and we just had the best time, and I got to know her well and continued to follow her after we came back from our trip, and just always admired the work that she had done. And again, her contribution to the stitching community will be missed. And then also, on the heels of Angela's passing just earlier this week, a dear woman named Linda Wallace also passed away. And if you have a moment and are so inclined, I would encourage you to hop on over to Instagram and look at Sister Arts 2020. Linda Wallace probably has some of the finest hem stitching and finishing of anyone I've ever seen. And I first met her at summer school 2 years ago. And we just had the best visit, and she was so gracious and so kind at helping me kind of get started with some of my hem stitching, and just so encouraging around, that you don't have to frame everything. You can hem stitch it. And she just has some beautiful work, and she will also be missed. So the stitching community kind of took a hit this week, and I just want to take a moment and pause and reflect and acknowledge the contribution that both of those women have made to the community as a whole. So they will both be missed. Also, I got a couple emails that said, "So Ray, what are you stitching on? What are you really working on? What do you do in your spare time?" And so I'm going to insert a picture here. I actually gave this little item away as part of a retreat exchange, but it got me thinking about the types of things that people exchange, right? And why is that important? So I had done, again, from the trip at Isle of Man, I had done a little gnome. I believe it's from the Tiny Modernist, and it was part of a biscornu, and I only stitched one because I didn't want to stitch all four. And I just stuck it in this little box by me and my stitches. And I got to thinking as I was making my exchange piece, which happened to be Brenda Gervais' Keeper of the Pins, and I thought, I'm just going to do that. So I put it in a little stitching box made out of rulers. And then that got me thinking about the types of stitching boxes that we all use and how we organize ourselves. And I thought, oh, that would be kind of fun to share as well. So I know some of you have seen these already, but these are Cuyana, C-U-Y-A-N-A, Cuyana cases. I love it because it's red, but I also love it because when I unzip it, I can actually put my little 3.5-inch hoop in here. I can put needles, I can put all kinds of little gizmos and gadgets depending upon if I'm sitting beside my chair or if I'm going to take it with me on a trip. I might load it differently, but it's my little stitching box. So that got me thinking then about, well, what other types of stitching boxes might we use? And I have a good friend named Rita, and Rita was at a retreat, and she had this Longaberger basket. And I have several Longaberger baskets, but I'd never seen this one. And what I liked about it was that this Longaberger basket had a little plastic insert here, a plastic insert here, and then she had very, very cool, had taken and on her apron of her basket liner, she'd put all these cool pins. And I thought, I want a basket like that. So this basket I found on, I think, eBay, and it hasn't been made for like 20 years, but I love it because it's sturdy. I can take it with me from room to room if I'm going to Zoom on a different Zoom or in a different location because my husband's home. But again, a great little basket. And so then that is why when I put together that little basket for my retreat exchange, I thought, well, that'll be perfect. It's not too big, it's not too small, and it'll work just really well. So again, you can kind of see what I worked on there, put it in that Me and My Stitches ruler box, and it's a little organizer for the person that won that in their chair. I also had a couple people say to me, so Ray, what are you working on? What are you doing? Well, I want to tell you a little story. I, as you all know, love antique samplers, and I'm working on getting many reproduced. And I ran across one, and I'm going to show you the original. This is the original, and it's Louisa Marsh. And I loved Louisa Marsh because I felt like she was just a very joyful sampler. Lots of beautiful colors. You'll hear more about Louisa in upcoming episodes, but this is the back of Louisa Marsh. I just loved the colors. I thought her choice was just beautiful and like I said, very joyful. And so I have been working, and I'm almost done, on getting Louisa Marsh stitched. And here's what she looks like so far. And I'm missing just a little bit down there on the wings of the birds. There's some stump work that goes on those wings. It's kind of like a padded satin stitch. But I've just about got her wrapped up, and you'll be hearing a lot more about her on future episodes. So look for Louisa Marsh, but that's kind of what I've been working on. I have another one I've started, and it's Solomon's Temple. It's pretty involved, but I've really enjoyed stitching on it because it's a lot of red, and so you just kind of fill in. So that's another thing that I've been working on as well. Again, kind of keeping along the same lines of the housekeeping, what are some other things I want to call out? So I've been listening to some great podcasts lately, and one of my favorite podcasts right now is one called Haptic and Hue. And what I like about Haptic and Hue is that the narrator on that show actually dives deep into textiles and the world of textiles and has many different angles that she shares about textiles, fabrics, and materials that we stitch on. And if you haven't subscribed to that podcast, or you're not even sure what a podcast is, I would encourage you to just type in the word podcast in your search bar, and it will probably take you, it'll say, do you want to download this app if you're on an Apple device? If you're on an Android device, it will prompt you as well. And then you can search for Haptic and Hue. They also have a website. It's called Haptic, Haptic and A-N-D, Hue, Hue. And you can also subscribe from there. Just a great podcast. They're about 25-30 minutes long, and very, very informative. So if you like that kind of podcast, I would encourage you to take a look. Also, want to point you, if you haven't found her already, I've watched her for many, many, many episodes, and that's Michelle from Mama Loves You GB. She also focuses quite a bit on historic samplers, and her floss tube is a floss tube. It's not a podcast. It's one that you watch, not necessarily listen to. Again, very informative, and several of you reached out to me after I posted Jemima, thinking that perhaps Michelle could be a resource. So just want to reciprocate that experience as well, and just point you to her as well. Another one, and I've mentioned her before, but I really liked her very last episode, and that's Susan Stanley from Stitches in Time. Susan did a great job this last episode, really talking about how the elements of a quilt and elements of old quilts, antique quilts, have similar elements to what's in a sampler. And I loved that comparison. I loved how she was able to kind of make sense from those two different genres and bring them together. Talked a little bit about houses and how houses are present in quilting and how houses are present in stitching. I found it fascinating. Again, she's a really good floss tube. If you haven't subscribed to her, it's Susan Stanley, Stitches in Time. And then for the first time this past week, I watched Rachel and Sue from Floss Toss. And I was sucked in within about the first 5 seconds. They were talking about an event that they had attended at Winterthur Museum, and it really looked at antique samplers. And as a result of that, they kind of went down this rabbit hole of finding a sampler from the area in which one of the individuals had grown up, and how that tied to Mackinac Island and the French fur trade, and it was fascinating, and I really enjoyed that as well. So if you like history and the historical side of samplers, you might want to check them out as well. And then also, I want to take time to acknowledge Sally. Sally reached out to me earlier this week, and she's from a floss tube called Flossie Sews and Grows. And it was so cool on 2 levels. Number one, that she reached out to me. I was like, oh, somebody's watching my stuff. That's exciting. But I also loved that she reached out to me, and she was from over across the water, over in the United Kingdom. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. So we did a little bit of an exchange via text, and she actually is working on her first sampler, and that's Jemima Fortune Cunningham. So if you haven't taken a look at her floss tube, again, I would encourage you to do so. It's very fun and totally worth your time. I also was thinking about what did I want to share with all of you today. And one of the things I wanted to share with you today, again, I had shared a couple PDF books that I've stumbled across. And one of the books I want to share with you today that's a free download that I will put the link to is one from 1910. And it's called When Mother Let Us Sew. And it's delightful. It's all black and white, no colored illustrations, but the illustrations they do have are in silhouette mode. And I found that very appealing. And there was one page that I thought was very clever. I have a little workbox that Grandma gave to me. It's pink and blue with ribbons. Let's look inside to see. For my busy little seamstress, said Grandma low and sweet, and my dear, 'twill please me if you keep it nice and neat. Again, just a great little resource, and I will put the PDF link in the show notes so that if you want to download that, you sure can. I also got to thinking about what it was that I wanted to share with all of you today. And it dawned on me that maybe there would be interest in just kind of exploring some of the different types of ground fabric or ground cloth or fabric or materials that are used when samplers are being stitched. And so I went through my collection. Some are old, and some are just old, new to me, old. And I thought I'm going to share a couple examples. So the first example I want to share with you is probably one of the older ones I have in my collection. And the reason I'm sharing this with you, it's 1703, and it's M and M is the only marking I can see on here, M and M. And what I like about this is I don't know what's on the back. I've not taken this apart yet because I'm not ready to work on this yet. But I want to call your attention to it because this is full coverage queen stitch. I'm going to say that again. This is full coverage queen stitch, which if you've done any queen stitches, they're very involved. They're beautiful stitches, but they're very involved. I'm quite anxious to see what might be behind this because I really don't know. I'm hoping that there's some other clues to it, but I was blown away when I acquired this because I thought, first off, who in their right mind would do full coverage queen stitches like this? And secondly, the fact that it's from 1703 got me thinking a lot too, that this is actually older than the United States, right? This is older. This is not, over 500 years old. So again, I'm anxious to take this apart to see what's on the back side, to know exactly what this ground cloth was or what the fabric was that was stitched on. But the fact that it's full coverage queen stitch was something also that drew me to it. I also have another sampler that I have that is one of my older ones as well. And this is from 1780. And if you look at this one closely, it looks like it's on gunny sack. And it's actually, I believe, probably homespun. But what I like about this one, this is Anne, the daughter of Terence and Betty McDonald. She made this work in the 8th year of her age, 1788. I have found Anne. I have found her father, and I found her mother as well. A couple things I like about this one is she must have loved seashells or rocks or stones or something, because up here she has this gobbledygook looking knot. And the only thing I can think is that she must have had a seed pearl or something attached to it. She also has a little gobbledygook thing down here that she must have had something stitched to it. And then I love her fancy stitching down below. So I have reproduced this. When I acquired it, it was not in a frame. And so I actually matched my colors directly from the back, which ironically were pretty well preserved. And then when I acquired it, it had been cut up here. So I did make some modifications to my reproduction, which you will see once that chart comes live. But what I like about this for this particular episode is that I do believe that this is probably homespun. I do believe that this almost looks like it was, the fabric was actually created in a very homemade fashion. And again, just a very sweet little sampler, 1788. Again, a full 85 years later from the one I just showed you, which is fascinating as well. Another one that I grabbed from my collection was actually a gift from a series of many dear friends that I used to work with in my former life. And they were invited to my funtirement party. And I actually was gifted this sampler. And I love this. Number one, I believe it is in the original frame. Number two, it's perforated paper, which again, I'll zoom in here a little bit so you can kind of see it. So it's done with perforated paper, and it's lovely. It's absolutely lovely. And the other thing I like about it is the back is very, very rustic. And I believe the back is the original. And if I were to take this off, it would be interesting to see what was in the back of it as well. So again, just a lovely commemorance from several dear friends who knew that I loved samplers, and I did not have one that was with perforated paper. So I really like this one as well. Again, another example of what girls would have stitched on. They could have stitched on the perforated paper. I also was gifted another one that's a little bit different in that it is a stamped sampler. And by stamped sampler, what I mean by that, this one was stitched in 1958. What I mean by that is this fabric was purchased at maybe a Woolworth's or a Five and Dime or a local not hardware store, a local like a Five and Dime, and the actual stitching is stamped onto the fabric. And what I like about this too is it's actually signed in the back, and there's an inscription in the back from whoever stitched it, and then it was gifted to me as well. So again, this is stamped. It's more like an embroidery, and the little girl stitched directly over the X's that were stamped. And then this is another example of a stamped sampler. And from a distance, it doesn't really look stamped, right? From a distance, this looks like a regular sampler, like something that was done and the little girl just started stitching. But upon closer inspection, you can see, based on how those X's are and the fact that you can't really see where those intersections are, that this was also a stamped sampler when it was purchased. And it wasn't uncommon for girls in the, even as late as the 70s and 80s, to actually buy stamped pillowcases, stamped bedspreads, stamped quilt tops, stamped quilt squares, and then stitch them in various colorways. So again, it's a lovely sampler. Again, it's stamped, and I would guess this is could be about 1960, 1955, 1960. So that kind of got me to a little bit a closer time frame. And this one was one that I did clearly back in 1991. You can kind of see that. And what the reason I'm showing you this one is, if you look very closely, you can see that it's an even weave. And I believe I did this on something called Jobelin. And Jobelin fabric, again, very easy to stitch on, very relaxing to stitch on, because you don't have to worry about, is there a little skinny thread and a fat thread next to each other? It's all very even. And again, this one is very large, but believe it or not, I have a bunch of red, white, and blue stuff, patriotic stuff that I enjoy. So another example using some different type of fabric called Jobelin. So we've gotten homespun, we've done stamped, we've done paper, perforated paper. And then this is another one that is from the Wayback Machine when I was stitching early on. This is from 1990. And this one is something called fiddler's cloth. And again, fiddler's cloth was very similar to Aida cloth. And so the holes were very easy to see. And there wasn't a lot of linen being stitched on, at least not in my area at the time. So this is probably Aida count, 14 count. Again, I have it still hanging in my home because I still like it and it matches my decor. And it was just a fun little stitch. It's Brementown Musicians by Prey Schooler. So I also thought, okay, well, let's pull out a couple others that are maybe same time period. This one is 1990. Again, this is the Fox and the Grapes. And you can see very distinctly that this is on Aida cloth. And my guess is it's probably a sage color. But again, for the time, and I still love this. It's hanging in my home as well. It's part of that same cluster on a wall with the Brementown Musicians. But another example of how different fabric or different ground cloth impacts, or ground fabric impacts your final product. So I also got to thinking, not only does a different type of fabric impact how a sampler might look, it can also be impacted by the color that you choose. So what I've shown you so far is pretty neutral. This is probably the darkest one I have, and this is Kathy Barrick's Swan Garden. I loved this. I loved this. It was the first time I'd ever stitched with silks. I loved the bird. I loved the colors. The bird was challenging. I will tell you, I unpicked quite a bit at times, but I really liked how it turned out. And more importantly, what I liked about this is that the color of the fabric influenced then how the final product turned out. And so much like the little girls who stitched their antique samplers, they probably didn't have a lot of choice. They probably had something that was pretty light, white or a beige. They probably didn't have a lot of color to pick from as they were stitching. And so for them, it was more about what did Mama have that they could use. The last example I want to share with you is one you've all seen before. This is the original to M. Holloway. And M. Holloway, when finished, is about 1/4 this size. But she did something called Berlin wool work. And what I like about this one is, I don't think this is Penelope canvas. I'm pretty sure it's not. But it's a very coarse type of foundation. It's a very coarse type of work being done on it. And I like that. Okay, so this last one I want to share with you is something that I believe is on fabric called Penelope or Penelope canvas. And I'm going to just show you a little bit of that close up. You'll notice that the intersection of the squares are doubled. So you've got almost like you've got your tic-tac-toe board, right? And then it looks like there's another tic-tac-toe board on top of it. And that's called Penelope canvas. Again, you might see some Penelope canvas even currently being used in some type of needlepoint. But if I take the paper from behind away and you look, you can kind of see, let's see if I can get it down here in the black part against my shirt. See how those intersections have double. There's a double intersection. It's almost like a mesh or a webbing, but it's Penelope canvas. And again, this looks like it's some type of Berlin wool work. And the thing I like about Berlin wool work is it's real thick. It's like it's almost like a yarn. Still very vivid colors as well. So again, you've got all different kinds of ground cloth or ground materials that the little girls used when they were stitching their samplers, which makes it very interesting to me when I find a sampler that I'm drawn to. You know, I'm thinking about what was the type of ground cloth that was being used, what did she use for her fibers or he used for his fibers. And again, sometimes all they had was what Mama had in her sewing box. Many of them didn't get to go to the store and pick out what they wanted, and they for sure probably didn't have an LNS either, a place that they could go pick out and touch and feel everything as well. So hopefully that kind of piques your interest as you begin looking at your own collection of different types of work that you've done or things that you're looking to collect, particularly as it relates to the type of ground cloth or the type of fabrics that are being used. I will tell you that my choice right now is usually a 40 count linen or a 36 count linen. And I've got a couple of, I think the one hanging on the wall up there is a 36 count linen. And my choice right now to stitch on is usually about a 40 count linen, 36 or a 40 count linen. I like the 36 if it's over dyed because it kind of shrinks it and makes it smaller. But it's fun to see the progression even I've had as a stitcher, you know, moving from Aida cloth to actually being comfortable with linen over the course of about 35 or 40 years worth of stitching. So I would encourage you to think about that as you're thinking about your own collection and the types of things that you're using as well. So it kind of gets to the point in the floss tube where I want to share with you a couple of different tech tips that maybe would be helpful for you as you think about how the technology that you carry in your pocket can be used to help you with your stitching and with the needlework that you're doing. So the things that I'm going to share with you, if you don't want to watch the tech tip, you're welcome to click off. If you are going to watch the tech tip, let me tell you that what I'm going to be sharing is the following. I'm going to share with you a couple things that came as a result of some family members. And I was like, oh my gosh, if my dad doesn't know that, there's probably other people that don't know it. So I'm going to share with you about that. And then also, not sure if many of you knew that you have a level inside of your iPhone. So the first thing I want to share with you, it came about because my dad called me this week. And my dad said, hey, do you have Donna, who's my daughter-in-law, do you have Donna's phone number? And I said, yeah, why? And he goes, well, I got a text from her. And I'm like, and my dad has an iPhone. And I said, Dad, if you have a text from her, you have her phone number. And he goes, I do? And I said, yes, if you have a text, so when you get a text on your phone, you get a text message, and you want to call someone, if you go to the text message, so this is my daughter, Abby, if you go to the text message, and if you tap on their face or the letter that starts with their name, it brings up a submenu. When you get that submenu, I could call my daughter, I could FaceTime my daughter, I could email my daughter, or I can tap on the word info. If I tap on the word info, there's her phone number and I could call her. So again, it reminded me with my dad that perhaps people don't know that. And it's a simple little use. We're all using messaging, whether we text message and read them only, or whether we text message and reply. You're going to tap on the individual circle. Again, this is on an iPhone. I should have said that. This is on an iPhone. Tap on the individual's name, and then you can call them, FaceTime them, email them, or get additional information. You may not be able to FaceTime if they are an Android, and you may not have additional information if you've not put them in your address book, but you should be able to call them because that's how the text messaging is working. So again, you tap on that little circle and you'll be able to get a hold of them. Inside of everyone's phone that's using an iPhone, there's an app called Measure. So you remember in episode 1, you pull from the middle, and when you do, you get a search menu. So I'm going to pull from the middle. I'm going to type in the word measure. And when I type in the word measure, it's going to give me the image of the app up at the top. It looks like a ruler with black background, white letters. So there's the word measure. I tap on the word measure, and down at the bottom in the sub part of the app, it says measure or level. Tap on the word level. And now if I want to see if something's level, I can use my iPhone to work just like a level. So if I'm hanging a photo, if I'm hanging a picture, if I want to make sure that what I have is square on, I can use the level that's built into the measure to do that. And once I hit 0, it turns green. If I'm off, it's black. Once I hit 0, it turns green. So again, if you are hanging pictures with your significant other, and your significant other says, no, 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 you need to go up, and you're like, no, 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 I need to go down, you can put that phone right on top there of the frame, and it'll tell you which one of you might be correct, or if either one of you are correct, and you can adjust how you're hanging your picture as well. So that level in there is something that I think as stitchers we should know how to use. So again, Measure app has how to measure, but the level is the one that I use probably the most. So again, thank you for joining me today. Really appreciated your time, and as we talked about the things that we discussed today, we did a little housekeeping today, did a couple shout outs today, took time to acknowledge 2 of the women that have passed within the stitching community, talked a little bit about ground cloth and ground fabric and the types of fabric that might be used on samplers, and then wrapped up with some tech tips. So again, thank you so much for hanging out with me this morning, this afternoon, or this evening. And if you haven't subscribed, please take time to hit that subscribe down there in YouTube. That helps me be able to connect with you. And then if you have any questions, comments, thoughts, things that you'd like to see covered in the next episode, please take time to put that in my comments. I do read every single comment, and that helps me feel more connected with each of you. So with that, thank you so much, and may your floss never twist.